In our wedding, our first vow was to uphold the Constitution of India. We told the Panditji, first of all, everything has to be gender neutral. Give us anything else.
That my learning and lesson in life has been that the energy of the young and the wisdom of the older people needs to be combined for any social movement to make an impact. Neither alone will work. Student politics in IIT is not the DU student politics. Really? It's very sanitized, very cut out from the outside world, but focused on campaigning, going door to door.
Wow.
So I get tested 4 elections in IITs.
Hi everyone, welcome to a very special episode of A Dash of Inspiration. Just like me, I think y'all would have seen very interesting stories of entrepreneurs who've come and built phenomenal products and services in the business. But it's not every day that you actually get to hear the stories of two really amazing people who went abroad, got some of the best education possible, but chose to give it all up to come back into their own country and build one of the most impactful ecosystems for young people to participate in policy shaping and actually interacting with the government. I have two such phenomenal people today, Aprajita and Rohit. Welcome to the show. So excited to have you.
Thank you.
So both of you have had a very unorthodox journey into building what y'all are building. And while, so many of us know the impact that you've had through the work that you're doing with the Quantum Hub and VILAC, I don't think many people know the actual journey of why y'all chose to go to universities like Harvard and Oxford, give it up and come back into the country. So I'd like to start there. So with Rohit, you started off as an engineering grad in IIT and you decided to take a complete U-turn and you ended up in this. So talk to us about how that started.
I think a lot of young people start with engineering.
Yes.
So I would perhaps start with that. But I think for me, the journey was my public policy journey kind of essentially started at IIT. I'm from a very middle class background, raised by a single mother, and the focus was always on the sciences. And that's the reason why I ended up at IIT, and also because you felt that that's what is going to give you job security in a very good place. But once I was in IIT, I actually got very involved in student politics in IIT, and the student politics in IIT is not the DU student politics. Really, it's very sanitized, very cut out from the outside world, but focused on campaigning, going door to door.
Wow.
So I get tested 4 elections in IIT, starting from my hostel level. So 3 at the hostel level, with the head of the hostel as the third one, and then 1 at the institute level to sit in the institute senate
Wow.
with the faculty. I think that was a bit of a beginning for me to see what impact young people can have in shaping outcomes if they're part of the policy decision-making process.
That's amazing.
So in IIT Senate, for instance, we were one of the first ones that worked with students to try and give inputs on major minor curriculum in IIT, change some of the stuff around elections were run.
Wow.
That sort of is what got me started. And, then one thing led to another.
But while most of your batch was busy, building tech products, why did you decide to pursue this further?
Initially, I did go the conventional route. So my first job was with BCG in Bombay as a management consultant. So I worked there for 2 years. But I think the policy bug, so to speak, had bit me. So during that time at BCG, I reached out to a lot of people trying to ask them that how does one even enter this space? How can I do more in terms of the impact that I can create? And then one thing led to another, one conversation led to another, and then I ended up in Delhi at an organization called PRS, which works with members of parliament, and that was my beginning. It was a bit of a hit and trial,
Yeah.
and trying to figure out how to get into this space.
That's amazing. And, parallel to that, Aprajita, you anyways have a very interesting journey because being a woman, building your own organization and being in this space, but you've also had a very unconventional foray into it. I think you were doing business studies at one of the best universities in the world in Oxford. So how did you go from there to now coming back and building this?
So actually, my undergrad was in business studies. I studied at Delhi University, and I also grew up in a sort of middle class household. So the understanding was get the best placement as soon as you graduate, get the best job. But during my college, even though I was doing business studies, I got involved in street theater. And in 2009, if you remember, there was this terrorist attack in Mumbai.
Yeah.
And the whole country was shook. And there was a general election just after that attack, I think about 2-3 months from then. And only 33% people, voter base in South Mumbai turned up to vote.
Oh my God.
And that somehow had such a huge impact on our psyche, on my psyche, that how is it that, when something went wrong, everybody was on the streets, there were candlelight marches, there was so much talk about how people are unsatisfied with the government.
Yeah.
And when it comes to vote, people just don't leave their house. And so we actually, me and my friends, we had been working on a play, and that play was called Tu Gir Gaya To Kya, which means if
You've fallen, so what?
yeah, so what? And that play just hit the right nerve. And we went with this play around the country in many different campuses. We started this thing called Manthan when I was in Delhi.
Right.
The idea of Manthan was to get street theater back on the streets.
Yeah.
And, get it out of campuses, back among people.
Yeah.
And through that, while we were performing this play and so many other college societies joined us, etc., I was convinced that I want to do something in that. And when I was passing out from college, I got a job at a consulting firm, and so I got my placement.
Yeah. Your parents must be very proud.
But in my mind, I was very sure that, I want to do something which creates some kind of an impact.
Yeah.
And luckily that year, PRS Legislative Research, where Rohit was working at that time, of course, we didn't know each other. They launched a fellowship called Legislative Assistant to Member of Parliament Fellowship. So I got selected in the first batch of LAMP Fellowship, and I was placed in an MP's office, and it was life-changing because until that point, there were not too many options as well,
Yeah.
even able to access this ecosystem.
Absolutely.
And after that, once you start on public policy, the path is such that it's so addictive, you don't enjoy anything.
I actually want to take one step back, right? Because, through the show, we also want to talk to people who possibly are in your shoes, right? And, we speak to so many young people, and, even back in the day, I think young people are in general concerned. They're becoming more and more aware of it. But there's always, I think, two big questions that come up, right? One, okay, I may care about it, but do I have any agency or power to impact change? Second, is this actually a good career path? That's what pretty much 99% of the people would think, right? Very few people would have the kind of courage that you all did, which is pursuing something while you all had very cushioned corporate jobs and corporate lives ahead of you. So talk to us a little bit about that. What was it like sort of taking that path, or, any challenges, and why and how did you finally decide to take that plunge?
And of course, lots of challenges. And so when I started out, and Prajda and I were just discussing about it. So I moved from BCG to PRS. And when I was looking to move, my salary was going to decrease. It was becoming 1/4. So I called up my mom and I said that, here is this really nice thing I want to do. I feel passionate about it. I think I derive meaning out of it. I'm going to leave it and I'm going to move to Delhi. So literally had a fight, like a massive fight. She slammed the phone on me. I slammed the phone. After a point, you're an adult. You tell your parents, "Ki aap kya kar loge?"
Yeah.
I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. But it did. Thinking back on it, it does require either a very strong conviction to sort of take that kind of plunge, because when the rest of your ecosystem in which you've grown up is going in a particular direction,
Yeah.
this is very uncharted territory.
Yeah.
Taking a risk.
Yeah.
But Prajda and I were discussing about it. If you are coming from good colleges and you have those colleges and those brands have given you the confidence, then if you don't take that plunge or do a startup perhaps, or try something entrepreneurial, then who else?
Yeah.
What is the negative downside that could potentially happen, right?
Yeah.
So, that was our journey, but we did realize that it does have it's a significant, you're really asking somebody to take a leap of faith.
Yeah.
So if we can ease the process for people, I can galvanize the ecosystem and get more people into this space.
Yeah.
So in fact, in Vilac, we run a program called the Policy in Action, which is directed at younger versions of us,
Yeah.
who are young graduates working in places like we worked at, but designed in a way that it allows them to experience the space within that zone, so that when they're more comfortable,
Yeah.
they can make that plan and we can help make it happen.
And since when we started out, I think this space has also become a little bit more structured.
Yeah.
I think we were doing this in 2010, 11.
Yeah.
It's just been 10 years.
Yeah.
A lot, 10 to 15 years. A lot has changed.
Yeah.
And I think when we were doing this, when we were taking our first steps into public policy, neither of us knew that we would become entrepreneurs in this space.
Yeah.
We were just doing it out of our own interest. And after we worked at PRS, after I was a LAMP fellowship, we did bunch of different things, right? I went to Oxford to formally train in this thing. Then Rohit went to Harvard. I was, in fact, then working in Snapdeal when I came back from Oxford.
Yeah.
And those were the heady days when a lot of funding started coming to Indian startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
So what it allowed me to do is actually experience how the entrepreneurial ecosystem in India is changing.
Yeah.
And also understanding what I was hired for was actually government relations, public policy, media, etc. And that allowed me to get a sense of the fact that, change is coming fast, because now suddenly so many entrepreneurs are going to come. They will need to interact with the government. They don't know how to do it because they're not coming from your traditional families. Already everybody was in touch with policymakers. Policy making is becoming very complicated because, technology is going to have a huge impact. And that, I think, the policy space therefore kind of changed a lot because of that.
And very quickly.
We just felt in 2016 is when we started Vilac, because of our own experiences and because of the fact that we had this sort of like unconventional journey in policy. We felt that there might be a lot more people who do feel the need or who do feel the call to do something which is impactful, to get involved in society at a larger scale, but just don't know what the first steps should be.
Absolutely.
Can we make it easier with Vilac? That was the idea.
Yeah. And I remember, I think I first met you in your early years of Vilac, right? And I saw the phenomenal work. I saw how energized these young people were. And you're right, I think the ecosystem is changing. But, for a lot of people watching, right, including till recently, I think people are still, I would say, almost scared of what policy making is. They misunderstand it for politics. So they feel, okay, it's too opaque, too complicated, I don't want to get involved. I'd love for you guys to actually take this forum and sort of decode that, right? Why is it important? Why is this relevant? And more importantly, in today's day and age, how can somebody access this?
I think complicated, yes, but I think also the cynicism that is there in the, social ecosystem. You hear that constantly from your family, constantly from my mom. And coming from a family of science graduates and, otherwise, this thing about politics is dirty. Stay away from it. Kya karna hai?
Unsafe hai.
So that is there. And that's why I think a little bit of demystifying it is important.
Yes.
We took the plunge, but for instance, one of my first experiences was that I took the plunge and moved to PRS, which is a civil society organization. So one step removed from the politics place at that point. But I remember the first time I went to brief a member of parliament on a piece of legislation that was coming up. And I think this was MP Mr. Tiruchi Shiva, who's from Chennai, and I'd gone to his house to brief him, and I realized that I was hoping to sort of reach a place which is a citadel in some way, very difficult to get into, a person who commands immense power. But we literally just walked into his house and he was sitting next to us like a very normal person, and I briefed him. And then subsequently later, I ended up briefing Sushma Swaraj.
Wow.
And, she used some of that material. And I realized that a lot of politicians are normal people, right?
Yeah.
Constrained by a system, perhaps, which is unrelenting and ruthless. But I think people also need to see them as humans.
Yeah.
And when I started working with one, and I led the policy team of Mr. Jayapanda for 2 years. And, you interact with people on a day-to-day basis and you realize that they're all making decisions in a constrained environment. Many of them are coming from the right place.
Yeah.
So I think breaking that cynicism and letting people see the human side of it, and also understanding that policy making is not easy because you're trying to balance stakeholder interests. Very diverse group of people.
Yeah.
I think that's the first step. And that's what I think we've been trying to do.
Amazing. That's fantastic. And, I think especially in today's day and age, right, do you think it's become better because of the advent of social? You have been doing, work with Vilac for so many years. Do you see that there is some sort of shift where more and more young people are now excited, families are more open for them to becoming involved? Have you seen that shift?
I think social is a double-edged sword, to be honest.
I want to hear more on that.
While it has led to a lot of interest, right? It has led to many problems as well. For example, there's a lot of misinformation,
Yeah.
social media, disinformation. And you have to understand that India is a very large country,
Yeah.
right? So there are people with different levels of digital literacy, sort of critical thinking,
Yeah.
ability to understand whether something, I mean, what's the intention behind something
Yeah.
being on social media. So while, yes, I think social has definitely led to a lot more conversation,
Yeah.
sometimes, it has also led to a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
And, therefore you need to work even harder
Yeah.
to demystify, or if something is wrong on social media,
Yeah.
there needs to be an equal number of citizens on the other side
Yeah.
who can say, no, this is wrong, and critically question something.
Yeah.
So I think it's a double-edged sword. And also, I think in our own entrepreneurial journey, while we started Vilac, with citizens, we also felt, which is a citizen-facing work, we started TQH, which is
Yeah.
a policy consulting firm, a year after we founded Vilac. And the idea of that was that, on one side, you're engaging with citizens who
Yeah.
want change to come ground up
Yeah.
as a demand from citizens. But ultimately, their voice also has to reach to policymakers,
Yeah.
because they are the ones who are making policy.
Yeah.
And TQH works with industry, it works with multilaterals. There's a lot more engagement with bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Between Vilac and TQH, what we are trying to do is we are trying to work ground up and top down.
Yeah.
Because we understand that change does not happen just by doing one or the other.
And it can't happen in silos.
And I give you an example. For example, now women have equal rights on property,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now that law got changed in 2005 under the Hindu Succession Act after a lot of advocacy from academics, from activists, etc. So that is something that happened top down, right? That the law changed. There were constitutional debates around it, and the law changed. So we do have equal property rights under the Hindu Succession Act. But if you really see, is it happening on the ground still? No. So that needs to happen at the level of the citizens.
Yeah.
So any change has to happen at both ends.
Yeah.
I think that example, when I saw, it made suddenly a lot of sense for us as well
Yeah.
Doing both.
to be doing both.
To be doing that's amazing. And I also started my entrepreneurial journey around the same time as y'all, and I saw so many challenges, and I have a slightly more conventional business, right? But with y'all, when y'all were doing all of this, I'm sure it was really challenging. So can y'all talk to us about some of your early onset challenges? And I think the most recurring thing that I'm sure anybody would ask you is, y'all have all of this education, you have all of this access, you could have easily again gone to any other ecosystem, any other country, built a really great white collar life for yourselves, but you all have chosen to continue to do this. So talk to us a little bit about your challenges back then and today, and what still makes you want to keep going here.
The funny thing is that when Rohit and I we went at different times to study abroad. In fact, Rohit had a green card also at that point.
In Trump's era. Very valuable asset.
We were very clear that even before going, that we have to come back to it.
Really?
It was never a question in our mind. It was the call to public policy came from the fact that we wanted to do something that is relevant in India. We are lucky to be born at such an interesting time in the country where, there's massive economic growth.
Yeah.
There's also massive inequality at the same time.
Yeah.
There is so much that needs to be solved for. Our society is in flux. There are technological changes. There's changes in culture, traditions.
Yeah.
So this is the best place to be right now if you want to do this kind of work, because it's so exciting. There's so much young energy. So I don't think we ever.
Yeah, and I think the goal was never really. I mean, for us, the definition of a career is something where you find purpose and meaning, right? The goal was not just about wealth creation and stuff like that. I mean, and those are admirable goals in themselves. But, so the purpose for us was coming from this because of the different experiences that we had along the way. That also sparked the thought in us that, it's important for younger people to have similar experiences, because sometimes it changes the trajectory of your thing. When I went to study, I actually went on a full scholarship that required me to, I was in a joint World Bank Japan scholarship that required me to come back, but it was never a question. Going in only, I was always convinced. So I was like, that anyways asking me to give an assurance on something that I anyways want to do.
Yeah.
So it was never really a question. And I think the idea was to learn and see how many developmental challenges are being when you study abroad, that's one thing that you end up learning is that how similar challenges are being tagged across the globe. What are practices you can bring in, and that was the idea. And it was always very clear to us.
And what's also very interesting is, you all both come from, middle class backgrounds, right? Usually, statistically, what you see, people who end up sort of entering this space, either come from, an underserved segment of society, or they have already done a lot and then they want to come back into it from a philanthropy point of view. Like us, middle class folks, and and our parents are always like, get the placement, get your career, make sure there's a proper job offer and things like that. So, anything specific that sort of stood out for you guys, saying that, hey, listen, no matter what, we will end up building a scalable career out of it? Because it wasn't just about purpose. Y'all have also, I think, managed to show that this is actually a scalable, great career to have. So how did you all, sort of strike that balance?
We didn't have a exact plan what we were going to do on Teva. And I think most entrepreneurs do it.
That's absolutely true.
Rationalize and give you a vision and mission. I think.
We all do that.
I think on, the point with us is also, by the way, we are married, right? There is a
That's something I want to get into for sure.
So there was a general alignment of what we want to achieve through our life. So the funny thing is, we got married in 2015,
Right.
and Bilac and TQH were not on the radar. Rohit was still studying at Harvard. I was working here, in Statdale. And in our wedding, our first vow was to uphold the Constitution of India.
That is amazing.
We told the Panditji, first of all, everything has to be gender neutral.
Amazing.
Give us anything else.
Yeah.
Second, that the first vow has to uphold the Constitution of India, right? So there was no Vilac or TQH in the mix then. And I think when we started Vilac was the name of the first program we launched for high school achievers, for high school students, right?
Yeah.
We didn't even think at that time that it will become into an organization of its own.
Wow.
We just had a 21-day curriculum.
That's how we started.
Yeah, that's how we started.
Yeah.
But by the time that curriculum finished and, the first batch was graduating, we were convinced that there is something here. There's a demand for this. And it genuinely makes a difference in how people think about society. And then we thought, okay, so now what? Like, we've done this one program. Yeah, what next? And then, we started thinking about other programs, other things we could do through Vilac. With TQH, I think because,
So because, for instance, when I was working in Mr. Panda's office, I used to notice a lot of civil society organizations, academics, companies would come and talking about this is how the policy should be shaped and these are their inputs. But unfortunately, in the Indian ecosystem, that space hadn't evolved as much. So it was unstructured. The space had traditionally been occupied by folks who have a PR background or lawyers, but very few who have a solid academic research policy understanding, but also understanding of media advocacy.
Yeah.
And so I felt, and when she worked at Snapdeal, she used to see the same thing, that some of these things are not structured. But as new entrepreneurs were coming up in the system, academics wanted to do more. We felt that, there is a gap here. Somebody who can work with ecosystem players and make sure that things that you care about actually convert into policy. And that's how we started to come about it. But to the earlier question, I also want to add that, I think you're right that a lot of entrepreneurs sometimes come from backgrounds where either there isn't too much to lose, or you have enough of a cushion. But I think that is where the strength of the Indian education system in that sense. I mean, I do have a lot of qualms with how our universities are structured, but we have built institutions that command respect, which is actually our cushion. So even though I am from a middle class background, but the fact that India has a world class institution gives me that cushion that allows me the space to experiment.
That's
and
amazing.
I started noticing that when I was in IIT at that time, the startup wave had just started picking up.
Yeah.
By the time I graduated, and 5 years later, when I graduated, in the job in the marriage market, your qualification would be if you have a great job. But 5 or 6 years later, if you were doing a startup, you were in high demand.
But also, I think generally entrepreneurship is contagious as well.
Very much.
So I think because I was in Snapdeal in those years when there is the biggest funding round in India till then, there was so much energy. You just felt that you could do it.
Yeah.
And I think at that time, because we felt the need to do it. We saw success in our first program. It just felt like, okay, let's do it. Like there was no question.
Yeah.
I think, to be fair, the public policy ecosystem was also very supportive of what we were doing.
Yeah.
So, for example, right in the beginning, we had Dr. Tharoor and Mr. Jay Panda
Yeah.
as part of our advisory board.
Yeah.
So they were very supportive that, these two
Yeah.
people are trying to do something. So that also really helped.
Actually, that's very interesting. And, I want to have a very pointed question, which is you actually talked about a lot of myths around politicians and policymakers, right? The public at large believes it's almost demonized it, right? Saying they're hard to access, it's, not great. So if you were to just quickly talk about 2 or 3 big myths about, politicians and politics, what would that be? I know the first one you said is they are humans.
First thing is that, this qualm that politicians don't work.
Yeah.
I think having worked with politicians very closely, I think they work the most.
Wow.
Every MP I have known works at least 16 to 17 to 18 hours a day. Because there is so much pressure. And every member of parliament in India is representing more than 2 million people.
My
That's
God.
the highest in the world.
Yeah,
You could be CEO of a very large company and you would still not be responsible for that many people.
that's so true.
And there are so many demands on their time. And in India, like for example, in rural parts, people expect MPs to show up at their daughter's wedding.
Yeah.
People expect MPs to show up at like the village puja.
Yeah.
And then there are things that they have to do as a part of their job. They have to be present at the parliament.
Yet
They
give
have to
results.
talk of laws, and they have to go back and fight for that job every 5 years. Unlike you and me,
Yeah.
who can choose not to do that.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of hard work. The MP I used to work with, Mr. M.K. Singh, he was a Rajya Sabha MP. He used to come to office at 7:30 in the morning, and by that time, he would have already read 5 newspapers.
Wow.
He would already know that this is the opened in this thing. It's just so hard to keep up.
That's amazing. So they're humans and they're very hardworking.
And I think this myth also that sometimes that they're not sharp, absolutely misplaced, because it also look at the breadth of issues that somebody
Yeah.
with. So once you are looking at data privacy or AI regulation, on the another end you are looking at social security benefits, or you're looking at education, or you're looking at agriculture. And look at the stakeholders you have to speak to. You have to have the ability to speak to a farmer. You have to have the ability to speak to a CEO. And in fact, I often tell young people that you cannot expect a person to be a subject matter expert in everything.
Of course.
And if anybody who has gotten elected definitely has the EQ to understand how people work, they definitely have the IQ as well, and they are very sharp. But they will be subject matter experts in things they have this thing in. But on others, they rely on experts. Brief them, because ultimately they are the ones who are channelizing the will of the people into policy making, but they're not necessarily experts. So I think this criticism that they're not sharp, I absolutely misplaced. I think I've seen a lot of very sharp people, and when I said extremely hardworking. I remember once, on Mr. Panda's, we had gone on a constituency tour, and they had this thing they used to do in Odisha that 10 days they would walk through all the villages as part of the See, the party used to do it. And one of the 2 days we were accompanying him. By the second hour, I was just dead because it was so hot.
Yeah.
Everybody was dripping. His kurta was drenched in sweat. But he was still, I as a team person could still be at the background, but he was patiently listening to every constituent who was coming and telling him कि सर मेरे को ये स्कीम नहीं मिल रही है, मेरा घर टूट रहा है,
Wow.
मेरे पास नौकरी नहीं है. So I think it's difficult.
Yeah.
And I also think that sometimes in India, we don't talk about it. But, I was in fact interacting with somebody who works in Berlin they work around building political capacity in people who want to fight elections, etc.
Yeah.
We don't often talk about it. But the amount of stress and the sacrifice that you have to do to be in public life,
Absolutely.
whichever side of the political spectrum, that's very exacting. You
Yeah.
cannot lead. I mean, look at the number of people in politics who are single,
Especially women. Yeah.
especially women. And even if you're not settled, like I don't know how much time you actually
Absolutely. And you're right, people like you and me, ultimately, we own our time, right? So at some
Yes.
point, we want to say we want to take a back seat.
Yeah.
You also can never phase out of the public eye. You're not a normal celebrity. You cannot one day say, okay, today I decide to completely exit the public life. Whether you're in office or not, you are always in public life. So that's a really big price to pay, I think, for the
Other thing is the internal party politics. As one big myth that we have is that the hardest thing is to fight, like, is the fight between parties.
Yeah.
But actually, every political person I have worked with has told me it's the internal party politics that is really, really exacting and demanding. Because who gets the ticket?
who gets the ticket.
If you win the election, who gets to be the CM,
Yeah.
PM,
Yeah.
whatever, like a minister.
Absolutely.
And also to be on that guard all the time. Imagine the paranoia that it brings.
Yeah.
You cannot trust anybody very easily.
Yeah.
And it has a huge impact on mental health.
Of course.
But you can never talk about it because you have to be this alpha.
That's so amazing. I have never heard a conversation about mental health of politicians. We don't even think about it. That's the first time I'm thinking, oh my God, they must absolutely have mental health issues. We talk about it when it comes to investors and founders and celebrities, but never politicians.
Because they have to put that face.
Do you think India, we just hold them to a very high, almost unrealistic standard?
Across countries, I think also, like for instance, in the US, we often talk about it. Why do people always have to appear as a couple?
Yeah.
Yeah, like why can't they just turn up alone?
Yeah. The first lady, the first,
Gentlemen, yeah.
But I think the role of politicians in society is also that, right?
Yeah.
They are giving you something to aspire to.
Yeah.
So there is this pressure to also look better than
Yeah.
Everybody else.
but I do think that in India we don't talk about it, but if you look closely, it's very, very real. The kind of mental health
Absolutely.
issues that politicians also have to deal with.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Wow.
part of the job.
That's amazing. And y'all, are at a very interesting intersection, because I think there are very few people who can actually bridge the gap between policy, politicians, young people, entrepreneurs, right? Like, for example, I'm actually completely on the other side of the spectrum, right? I'm just focused on building my business and things like that. But y'all are kind of in the middle, right? Because y'all are interacting with, private companies, investors, founders, yet government. And also, y'all are building in India in a very interesting time, right? Those of us who are in the media space are actually sitting back and thinking of this thing called, hey, India's finally having its brand moment, right? And again, when we were starting out, I keep telling these young entrepreneurs that we didn't have all these podcasts, right? We were energized on our own. I remember I was working with Ritesh, you were working with Snapdeal. We were just energized. We would not have these platforms and Shark Tank, none of that. We were just energized on our own. But I think today it's very different, because India has a very interesting space in the global point of view, right? And I'd love to get your point of view on, what that's like, and how does it impact the kind of work that you do, especially with young people who want to now sort of participate in, policy engagement.
The thing definitely is a lot of energy, which is something that you feel when you enter every room, and that's part of having a very young kind of population.
Yeah.
And I think that really does impact a lot of different things that we end up doing. For us, because we are in the unique public policy ecosystem, it's the job of public policy professionals to talk to all kinds of stakeholders.
So,
Ultimately, we are the bridge between businesses, between government, between academics and otherwise. And I think for any policy folks, understanding of politics is really important, because even when you are talking about democracy, then of course that comes in, and that's about talking to young people. But even when I'm talking about public policy advocacy in TQH, trying to sort of figure out how policies need to be shaped, I need to understand politics. And the fact that you have a young population, you have a energized nation, all of that plays into
yeah.
this kind of ecosystem.
And you have a brand that is being built, right? Like made in India, the kind of, I think, gravitas that we have on a global stage. So I'm sure that's impacting the way young people are engaging as well.
Absolutely. I think what has happened with BILAC and TQH over the past few years is, which we of course now can backward rationalize, but I think what we are ending up doing is building a very unique ecosystem that interacts with all kinds of stakeholders. Usually what happens is, for example, if you are say a think tank, or if you are a particular kind of organization, then you would only be working with people who are your peers. But between MILAC and TQH, what is happening is we are talking to the next crop of people who are going into public policy through MILAC, right? And we are also doing a lot of work in rural areas, for example, on digital literacy. We are also seeing how India is changing, on like in rural areas, in tier 2, tier 3 cities, because we live with schools, etc. But in TQH, we are sitting in Delhi, looking at how policy is being transacted, in IHC and IIC, because those are the two big hubs where a lot of policy action happens in government rooms, in this thing. And then we are also engaging a little bit with the political ecosystem.
Right.
So I think and in any case, for any change to happen, you have to build coalitions in policy. You have to take people together.
Yeah.
You have to bring the right kind of people together to push for something.
Yeah.
And that's what we are hoping that we'll be able to do more and more of. India, traditionally, I think because we both studied abroad, and I was very surprised that all these ecosystems already existed in the UK, for example, where I studied. Because obviously their economy is, ahead, and they had institutions much longer than us. They've had democracy much longer than us.
Yeah.
So all of it is already institutionalized. But we are right now in that phase where we are building those institutions.
Yeah.
So I think we feel very excited about the fact that somehow we found ourselves in this. And, between both these two organizations that we are building, we are feeling that we are able to talk to more and more people across the spectrum and get them together on important subjects.
That's but like we said earlier, it's been a very prolific journey, but I'm sure it has its own set of challenges, right? And I'm very interested, especially with your Prajata, to understand, as a woman, I've faced my set of challenges, being an entrepreneur. I'd love to know from you specifically, what are like the top 2 or 3 challenges that you faced as a woman building in this space? Anyways, it's a very unorthodox space. And, for all those other women who want to get in the space, how did you overcome it?
So, not to hijack the conversation or step in, and she will come in on her own. The first funny thing was she told me initially that, when मैं जाती हूँ किसी meeting में, they say कि आपके पापा क्या करते हैं?
Yeah, people don't take my check still. वो बोलते कि sir का sign लेके आओ.
She would wear the sari. She would say that I need to dress up in sari to look older.
I agree. When you have to go to a government building, you actually do have to end up wearing. But yeah, Prajita, would love to know from you.
No, so I think, first of all, I do want to say that, by the way, public policy is a kinder place to women than many other fields.
Really? And maybe I should switch.
What happens is that in policy, there are lots of people who are coming in or who have come in. They already have, like these ideas of gender equality etc., in their mind. But initially, in the initial phases, when I was in Snapdeal, etc., because I was also younger, there were many times that you would go and meet bureaucrats who are, older, much older than you are.
Yeah.
And they would not take you seriously.
Yeah.
They would be like, who is this young woman who's coming and talking to us?
Yeah.
And, they would call my manager and they would be like, oh, can you send a more older person? And I was the only person who was doing this work there.
Yeah.
So I think initially it was a bit harder. But I also think that as this space has evolved and as more people are coming in, it's one of the more kinder spaces to women, to be honest.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, for example, we do a lot of work on technology policy, right? And in tech policy, there are women. But for example, when there are panels and all of that,
Manels, as we call them.
there was in many guys that I have like this, I know that I'm the designate mover, the token, the panel.
Yeah.
It's okay. But I think it's changing. And I think if you have to be an entrepreneur, this is probably a kinder space to be a woman.
Great. Maybe I will actually switch. And you all also happen to be married. And I would love to know from you, Rohit, how does that work out? Like, there are lots of pros and cons.
No, I think one of the first things, and not the first thing, that we continue to realize and surprise about the challenges is that when we started out as people who had never done a startup before, I think we didn't know what it takes. And I think the main thing that I have come to learn and appreciate and respect people for is startups take resilience. It's about day in and day out, through a crisis, through the ups and downs,
Showing up.
you have to hold your this thing. Be many times you're absolutely stressed. dejected. You feel what the hell is happening? Where is it going? But you can't switch off. You can't, just say, Ki, I'm going to go on a long vacation. I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's like having a baby. So I think
100%.
it's about resilience, which is something that we often talk about. And obviously, being married comes with this share of positives and negatives. I would say negatives are lesser in our context. But the first is that, you have, because we are married, we have a lot of visibility into each other's this thing. So there's a shared sense of understanding of the challenges. So
Yeah.
it's not as difficult for me to explain to her or her to explain
Yeah.
what is happening and why is she stressed or why am I stressed.
Right.
And being able to sort of comfort each other and have that trust, which is
Yeah.
a very important factor.
I think the downside,
Please do.
that at 2 a.m., if I remember something, then that person is right next.
And you can wake him up and remind him.
Tomorrow we have to do this. I just
So once I remember, she was like, this thing is bugging me. Let's go for a walk at midnight and we'll discuss strategy. It's like, dude, I need to sleep. Right. So I think that, of course, today is a challenge. But the trust that it comes with, that you can rely on the other person. I think that's quite kind of
I also think even if you had a co-founder who was not married to you, that relationship would take work.
Yeah.
Because you have to realize when two people are working together and they are in the decision making phase together, how do you split responsibility?
Yeah.
What are you good at and what am I good at?
Yeah.
How do we take charge where we are good at and how do you learn to leave?
Yeah.
Is not your domain. So I think we obviously in the first few years we also struggle to find that balance. But I think once you find that balance, if you're married, it's much easier. And also decision making is much faster.
Yeah.
Because you know where the other guy lives.
But yeah, I think it needs a lot of maturity
Yeah.
to also understand when to sort of step back. In fact, the funny anecdote is that when we were starting these two institutions, Vilac was started first, TQN was started a year later. I was making the Vilac website sitting in the Kennedy School lab. And my classmate comes up to me and says like, oh, this initiative you're building seems really cool. Who are you doing this with? I said, my wife. And I said, she's already registered it, we're going to launch. And she literally took me aside and said, don't think about it. And she said that I have often thought about whether I want to do this with my partner, this thing, and I think I would kill him. And I was like, ab to ho gaya.
But survive. That's good. Actually, I want to add something very interesting is that I think another myth that you all have accidentally broken is that people think policy is a very serious business. It's very hard. It's very troublesome, but it's also a lot of fun. Yeah. Right, and it's actually very gratifying, so I often tell people this, so I think, for people who don't know, I met you when we were both part of World Economic Forum, and I remember you introducing yourself. I'm like, oh my god, sounds really heavy, and I was running this young startup PR company, and I was like, sounds very serious and heavy. And then we ended up working on a project, and I was only doing startup PR at that time. She said, no, try it, and it was one of the projects for Vilac, and it ended up being the most fun thing. And I often tell people my policy saving exists because of her and Vilac, because actually it was so much fun doing it, right? And then we realized that actually the role that, let's say, media can play in policy shaping, right? It's so gratifying. We often tell, people within the company, we work with tons of startups and investors, but I'm like, how many places can you say the work that I've done has actually ended up impacting a real human being, an impact that you can actually see? So the fact that you can have fun, it's really interesting work, great people to meet, and still build a scalable business, I think that also is an amazing myth. Because before I met you, I was like, policy must be all old people sitting in a room and fighting with each other.
Try and break through our programs also that, one of the things about the Vilac motto in some way, tagline also, is that professional but not necessarily formal. It's also space fun. In fact, when we were building our office, the funny thing was that we were designing it in a way to make it look fun and quirky. Initially, we did have this discussion that, policy offices are usually quite dry and dull and it's like sense of serious.
Absolutely.
We were like, you're adding yellow here.
Yeah.
Here is adding from here. Are you sure you want to do this? And then we were like, we are trying to create something new.
Yeah.
Perhaps shape the frontier of how this looks. And let's try and shape it the way we want it, and we'll see.
We'll see.
And it should be inclusive. Right?
Yeah.
The idea is it should be a welcoming space.
Yeah. And not intimidating, which is what it is to a lot of people.
And that is what makes advocacy also, that is when it works.
Yeah.
And I think the point is that sometimes when you intellectualize it a lot, it's important to be solid in your arguments. But at the same time, it's also important to enjoy the process.
Yeah.
Because in any case, policy, public policy generally, and change in general, it's very
Slow.
tedious process.
Yeah.
It takes lots of years. For example, if the government has started to work on one law today, it may take 7-8 years for it to actually get it passed through the parliament,
Yeah.
get it actually implemented, see the impact of that. So if you do not enjoy the process, you will not, enjoy
Yeah.
at all. And the other thing about public policy as a profession is that it's very gratifying.
Yeah.
So, in the sense that a lot of people in our team, people like us who have founded organizations, all of us are doing it because of passion
Yeah.
first, and then everything else of follows, building around it. Like in our team as well, there's so much excitement if the government has, come out with some draft law
Yeah.
rule. People are excited that day.
Yeah.
It really increases their work.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like we have to look at this and
Because you're actually impacting something on the ground level, which you can see, which is, amazing.
and you also feel like you're part of something bigger.
Yeah.
I think that is a very gratifying feeling in
Yeah.
itself. In fact, in our team, there are lots of people who are lawyers and they were working with law firms. So we say that why did you switch to public policy?
Yeah.
Because that is the joy that comes with working in this.
Of course, a lot of great things that have already happened in your journey, but I know that there were some really hard times. And like you said, entrepreneurship is all about resilience, right? So, what were some really hard moments or challenging moments that really tested this resilience?
I think COVID was the first one. We were relatively new when COVID struck. And, Vilac was started in 2016, 2017, TQ started. So it had only been like 2-3 years and we were still building our presence. With Vilac, for instance, overnight suddenly, and we used to physically run programs in 10, 12, 15 cities in India. And then suddenly everything had to be shut.
Yeah.
And then we had to now figure out, and our classrooms, the way we designed them for young people, are vibrant, energetic, making people question, making people think.
Yeah.
critically. And to replicate some of that online, to also replicate a sense of community online is very hard. So suddenly we were like absolutely, wondering what is it and how are we going to sort of do about it. In DQH, we was just starting to build our presence because, one of the things in policy advocacy is that you have to build your influence to be able to really change policy outcomes, right? And that takes effort and work. And it is a slow process. So you put out thoughtful research, you speak about it in more places, you talk to more journalists, you write more opinion pieces, you become a thought shaper, and then eventually you find a seat at the table when you try and inform politics, right? And we were just in our infancy when suddenly a lot of these platforms and forums had sort of
Disappeared, yeah.
So we had to really try and sort of figure out how do we sort of navigate it and how do we sort of build that space, and it took a lot of effort. Now I think there's been a bit of changes in the funding ecosystem. I think philanthropy is also reimagining how it sort of looks at things.
Yeah.
There are often conversations on scale and impact, but not as much patience for things that are long gestation. Democracy takes work,
Yeah.
right? If I put the seed of citizen engagement in a young person, it's going to take 7, 8, 15 years to blossom. I was seeded that idea in IIT, then 10 years later, you see a different.
Yeah.
Similarly, with many young people, same with law and policy. So, for instance, as an example, right now, Nipun, who is a close friend and common friend, he works on accessibility and disability rights, and we have decided to sort of build a disability rights accessibility vertical within TQH, and we're trying to do advocacy for public policy. Now that's going to take time. If I want our urban public spaces to be accessible, it's not going to change overnight. But the philanthropic ecosystem has to have the patience and the tenacity to fund such initiatives for a period of time. It takes work to build that understanding. So these are some of the challenges I would think of. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there is generally a rough and tumble of running any organization today. But then these kind of headwinds that are beyond your control, right? For example, a lot of like COVID was one big thing that impacted us. Then similarly, the funding ecosystem, the way it's changing and shaping priorities on what gets funded, what doesn't get funded. So I think these are things that, you sometimes are beyond your control, and you have to constantly adapt
Yeah.
and change, and you have to do it quickly because, you have a team that are looking to you. What next?
Yeah.
You have to take care of a lot of stakeholders.
Yeah.
Tell them that, we'll figure this out.
Yeah.
And why you're still figuring it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, I think, the hardest.
Yeah. And you have already done this now for I think almost more than a decade.
No, it's been 8 years.
8 years, okay. Close to a decade. 10 years of marriage.
8 years of entrepreneurship.
8 years of entrepreneurship, and you'll are at a very exciting time, right? You'll have built such phenomenal products. There are some amazing people who worked with you and gone out to do amazing things. But I want to ask two very specific questions as we end this. I think my first question is, how do you see today the future of young people just interacting and engaging with policy? What does that look like to you?
I think, as we discussed a little bit earlier, I think the space, policy making as a space, and politics also is opening up, definitely. And, it's opening up for multiple reasons. There is technology. So you have social media, you're able to access stuff. So information gets passed around very, very quickly. So young people are aware that something is happening and I want to engage with that ecosystem. I think generally, as countries grow, as your economy develops, more and more people get engaged in civic action. That is a general trajectory of the country. So I do think this space will only bloom further. The only thing that I do hope for is actually, the philanthropic ecosystem in India. We are now at a stage where a lot more people are creating wealth than is unimaginable a generation before.
Yeah.
Right? People who are doing exits now, people who are, made a lot of money. They will very soon start thinking about, and many of them have already started thinking about, okay, so what next?
What next?
And what next for them will be some kind of philanthropy. That is also that we know. But I think their engagement with institution building at this point is very critical for the country.
Yeah.
Because these are things that ultimately give long-term returns.
Yeah.
This is what keeps country on the right path.
Yeah.
So even if they have long gestation, investing in citizens' capacity to engage with the government, to make sure that our cities work, to make sure that our local governments work, that is where we hope. And that's what we are trying to do.
Yeah.
And even as we think about what next for us, we want to build their interest in these kind of topics and issues, because Indians have to take on that matter.
Yeah.
Foreign donor, nobody can
Come and do this.
We have to decide what we want next from our country.
Absolutely.
And when we started out, there was a quote from there's this former Supreme Court judge at US who has this very famous quote which says that the most important office is the office of the citizen. Because ultimately democracies only work when citizens push. If citizens sort of sit back, relax, and let the system, they will power will concentrate. It will go in a particular direction that you don't want it to go. Ultimately, citizens keep governments accountable. Citizens shape the ecosystem and the institutions that govern the future. And young people have a lot of energy to do that. They have a stake in the future. So I feel that our goal is to sort of see how we can sort of facilitate that. And over the next couple of years, we are planning some interesting initiatives to see how more young people can get a seat at the decision-making seat in cities specifically, where it can become like laboratories for getting exposure.
Yeah.
So that then they understand the importance of it and grow on to shape those things. Like our cities today leave a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
Like Delhi as an example. Footpaths have certain kinds of issues. Pollution is a certain, but citizens have to push the government to do it, right? So, and ultimately, we need to sort of create forums where citizens can have that say. And I think that is what we really do want to do. And we fundamentally believe that democracies need citizens that are engaged and institutions that are robust. And that is really what takes it in the right direction.
And also, I just want to add something. I think it's ultimately this change will happen when there is a lot of intergenerational collaboration.
Yeah.
So while young people have a lot of energy, the older people have the right social capital
Yeah.
and actual capital.
Actually.
You have to fund that up.
And that.
And the wisdom
Yeah.
to understand how systems evolve, etc.
Yeah.
Right? So it's everybody's project.
Yeah.
But of course, the point is that in young people, because they have a higher stake in the future, they can build that demand.
In fact, it just reminded me, there is this book called Suffragette, which basically speaks about the right for women's voting
Yeah.
in the UK.
Yeah.
And the protagonist, I'm forgetting her name, she's the one who led the movement. And, eventually UK gave the right to vote to women after she died. And in the middle of the book, there is a point, it narrates a story from a young person, very passionate, very active, but slowly getting a little tired of hitting at the system. And in the middle of the book, she points out that my learning and lesson in life has been that the energy of the young and the wisdom of the older people needs to be combined for any social movement to make an impact. Neither alone will work.
Will work. That's fascinating and very interesting. And I really hope you all continue to do the great work that you all are doing. And as we end, I just want, for all of those people out there who are either looking to build in the ecosystem, be part of change, what's the one piece of advice you'd like to give them?
I think one thing that I would like to say, it's very cliche, but now I think I realize the wisdom in it. That ultimately, if you're passionate about something,
Yeah.
go after it. Because everything, like, you cannot stick with something unless it gives you energy.
Yeah.
We have been doing this since 8 years, entrepreneurship. It's very tiring. On many days, it's absolutely frustrating.
Yes.
Right? And you're just like, why did you do this to yourself? But even as you're feeling, down and out, and in policy, sometimes policy is not going in the direction that you want.
Yeah.
Politics is sometimes not going in the direction that you want it. You're feeling very
Dejected.
right?
Yeah.
Dejected. But then something will happen that, oh, we worked on this and it has clicked. Government has taken this as, a recommendation. And this is not happening. And suddenly it will give us so much joy. And, we are both excited. Our team is really excited. And that is what
Keeps you going.
keeps you going. And if it wasn't for that, if you were not passionate about this,
You
then
couldn't do
you would
this.
have long back left this and done something else. Because it requires everything from you,
Everything.
entrepreneurship in general.
Yeah, because it's a mindset, right? It's a lifestyle. I mean, I think all entrepreneurs will say this. It's not like, oh, at 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. we are entrepreneurs and then we are not. No, you are an entrepreneur 24 hours of the day.
Like, when you're getting into it, who tells you this?
Nobody.
Even if someone tells you,
We don't listen.
"Main kar luma." Which is what you say, which is what young people sometimes also talk about when they talk about policies. They are like, perhaps they didn't think of this.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as that, I think.
Yeah.
To me, I think when we talk to young people also, passion and what you care about, I think really matters. But I think also the other thing, advice would be surround yourself with people who also care equally.
Yeah.
Policy making is ultimately, and any kind of movements for change are ultimately about collaboration. It's not always competitive. It's about taking people around, having allies who are talking about the same things that you talk about. These will be your companions during moments of rejection and dejection.
Yeah.
But also your people who will cheer you on and people who will celebrate with you when
Yeah.
there's a victory. So I think passion along with this allyship and community basically are the two things.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rohit and Apraj. There's been a phenomenal conversation and really excited to see all the great work you all are going to continue to do. Thank you.